Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't beat that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 22 years of law enforcement analysis experience, all with the Oceanside Police Department in California. He is currently a crime and intelligence manager. He holds a certificate in crime and intelligence analysis. He holds a master's of art in contemporary British history from the University of London. And he's also a former president of the San Diego Crime and Intelligence Analysis Association. Please welcome Steve Walter. Steve, how are we doing?
We're doing good. Thanks very much, Jason. That was a rousing introduction.
I know. I think I did that without making any mistakes. How about that?
That was awesome.
So I was looking at your resume. I was thinking about this interview. We did the prep call yesterday, and we were trying to figure out how long it's been since we talked. And I was like, you know what? It's probably 10 years. And I see on your resume here that you have Bellevue, Washington for IACA in 2014, and that's probably the last time we were in the same vicinity together.
Yeah, I think that's a really good guess. I knew it had been a while.
Oh, jeez. So obviously time has passed us by a little bit as we've talked last. So I'm really looking
I need another reminder.
Yeah. But I am looking to hear your story. We've certainly have old connection at IACA conferences, but I'm looking forward to hearing your story and actually what you've been up to for the last 10 years.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, it's just to hear that the last IACA conference 2014 just tells me that I just don't get the chance to connect with the analyst community as often as I used to in the ways that I used to. So This is actually fun for me. This is a treat to get to talk to you and to think about who might be on the listening end and where they're at in their careers and be able to just exclusively talk about analyst stuff. So I'm looking forward to it.
All right, so let's hear your story. How did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
Well, I can tell you that, and I typically tell people when they ask this question that I completely stumbled into a law enforcement career. I never had any ambitions of working in a police department growing up. It was not something that I thought I would do. I think what led to it was when I did go over to London to do a master's degree. At the time, I really just wanted to go to London, live in London. I'd been there as an undergrad student. I said, if I'm ever going to do a graduate degree, I'm going to go to London. And so I said, what should I study? Contemporary British history, of course. And I loved every minute of it. And it was a ton of fun, but I didn't know what I was going to do with that degree, even as I was over there. And I was there, I started that in 1999 through 2001. And while I was there, 9/11 happened. Mm-hmm. And that was definitely a pivotal, profound moment. It was really life-changing to be overseas when something like that was happening, to be able to witness how the rest of the world saw America at that time. And it got me thinking, like, well, what can I do in this moment to be a part of whatever it is we need to do going forward? And I realized that my degree was really going to lend itself well to a career in intelligence analysis. That was contemporary British history for me, was much like a foreign affairs type of degree. I was learning a lot about government and international relations. So it seemed like it was a good fit. Plus, I was learning how to do research, how to give presentations. So at the time while I was there, I actually applied for a job at an organization in London that no longer exists. It was called if I remember right, it was called the National Intelligence Service, which was kind of like a Interpol, but only for the UK. And I went down, I still remember when I went down to interview, what was cool was the building I showed up at was adjacent to the big MI6 building. And I was like, this is pretty cool. Here I am. I'm going in like I'm going to see James Bond as I'm walking in for my job interview. And I sat down and I listened to the questions, and I realized I clearly had no business being there at all. I didn't get the job, of course, but I was totally intrigued. I was like, well, what do I need to learn to get here to do something like this? So The other thing that was happening at the time was my wife and I, we stretched out our London experience as much as possible, but we were running out of money. We both had jobs. I was actually working for an outfit called the History of Parliament, which was actually, it was like working for Parliament doing historical research. And I knew I didn't want to do that, and it wasn't paying anything. So we were like, we got to come back to the States. And so during that transition, I discovered that there was a program being taught in California called the Crime Analysis and Intelligence Certificate Program. So I flew back and I ended up in Steve Gottlieb's classroom learning
Nice.
the ABCs of crime analysis. And I think even then I kind of pictured myself maybe working for the FBI or the CIA. But I was kind of getting a crash course in police work at the same time. And I thought maybe I can do this too. And as that was happening, a job opened up here in Oceanside for a crime analyst position. I applied, and one thing led to another. Like I said, we'd run out of money and I needed a job.
Yeah.
So kind of to fast forward in the story, I showed up for the job interview here in Oceanside and thinking like this would be like a plug and play analyst position that I could maybe kind of get my feet wet with. And they looked at me and they said, well, we've actually never had a crime analyst here, and we need someone to build a crime analysis program. And in my head, I was like, oh my God, like, well, I'm definitely not your guy. I have no idea how you would even start to do that. But what I said was, absolutely, I'll take it. I can do this. And next thing I know, I had the job. So they hired me, and I came to Oceanside with the task of trying to build a crime analysis program.
Oh man, yeah, fake it till you make it.
That is, yes, absolutely the way you would describe it.
I do want to go on with Oceanside, but I have two questions before we leave London. So my ignorant American question is, when you worked for Parliament, did you have to wear a wig?
I did not have to wear a wig, but man, have you ever seen like a film where there's some really stuffy British library where like the smallest noise echoes through the chambers of the stacks of books?
Yeah.
That was essentially like the environment I worked in. I had these huge binders that were full of historical records for the House of Lords that were written in like calligraphy. And my job at the time was I had to read these things and then I had to transcribe the information into a Microsoft Access database.
Oh
So
wow.
that was one of my things when I showed up to take an analyst job. I was like, I do have experience with the Microsoft Access.
Oh man. And
But it
I
was
just
so boring. It was brutally boring. The task itself was boring, but it was pretty cool to get a paycheck and get that little symbol of Parliament on it and be like,
yeah.
yeah, I'm working on the inner circles of the British government.
My other question, this is more on the personal side of things. Is there a favorite spot or a favorite food or something that you miss from your time there in London?
Oh man, that's a really good question because there are so many that I could probably sit here and reel off. But I think if there's one thing I've always missed about London, when I had this job, I remember when it would start to get to summer and the evenings would stay lighter later. The sun didn't go down till like 10 o'clock, it felt like. And you'd get off work and I would walk. Instead of taking any transportation, I would walk from my office all the way down to the river. And I might stop in a pub, grab a pint, who knows. And I would get to the river, and often my wife was there with me at the time, and we would coordinate this. And it's not like today where you just would text somebody, meet me here. We would like say, okay, 6 o'clock, we're gonna meet on the South Bank after work. And
Yeah.
she would walk from her work and I would walk from mine, and we'd walk down there and I'd walk over the bridge across the river. And often there might be like a concert going on the South Bank, or just people out and about sitting on the river. And if I could transport myself and do that on any given evening, that's what I would do.
Nice. Good answer. All right, let's talk about you starting at Oceanside. So it's 2003. As you mentioned, you were influenced by 9/11. You get this position. You're at the moment. You're faking it. You're walking in for the first time to the office. Just talk about those first couple of weeks.
I can tell you that I definitely remember my first day on the job. So I showed up, and at the time, the person that hired me and was my first boss was our investigations lieutenant. So I walk inside. They'd given me my badge or whatever to be able to get in the building. And I go down to her office and she sees me and she says, "Oh, you've picked a really great day for a first day." She says, she's chipper, right? She says, "We just had a homicide last night. Hop in my car." So I'm like, okay, well, here we go. So next thing, we're rolling out to a homicide scene. We get there. It was outside. It was in a park outside of a bathroom, and the deceased had been taken away by that time, but there's still blood on the sidewalk. Here I am. We're walking around, and she says, "Oh, by the way, we still haven't found a murder weapon, so keep your eyes peeled." And I'm like, "We haven't found a murder. Keep my eyes peeled." I said, "I'm more likely to destroy evidence than recognize it. My God, like, what am I doing?" But
Yeah.
that was a moment where everything became very real, very fast. Like, just looking at the spot and going, somebody just got murdered here. This is not a TV show. What have I gotten myself into? And you just don't forget those moments. I mean, it's so vivid. I can look back and I can just see everything about that day. And I think we went from there, of course, to lunch. And that's when I learned that detectives, when you're a detective, you go have lunch at like 10:30 in the morning. And so, yeah, we went to her favorite Mexican restaurant, and I did my best to eat like a full plate of enchiladas, and that was my first day.
They're like, hey, is Alice coming back tomorrow? Or do you think there's probably bets going on? Like, hey, who's got him coming back? What's the odds?
No, actually, I was in. I was like, I'm all in. Like, this is cool. They just like
Oh,
let me like come along to a murder scene. I'm like, I'm definitely gonna stick around and see what happens next. Now they're gonna actually let me do real police work. This is crazy. So that was a hook for me. I was definitely excited about my first day.
yeah. So then talk about getting into that analyst role. They've never had an analyst and you've never been an analyst. So we'll just talk about how the growing pains of getting the unit developed.
So yeah, I can imagine that this is the part of the story that if you have people on this show, we share a lot of the same parts of this story, which is people hire an analyst. They want you to produce intel products or crime analysis products, and then you're stuck as being the person to figure out how to get the information because either the RMS system is terrible, or in our case, we didn't even have an RMS system. I'm asking, so how can I get access to read crime reports? And they're like, well, it has to get approved and then it's going to get signed by this person. It's going to go on a little cart and then it'll come over and then you're going to get this. You'll be able to read a report like 2 or 3 days later. And at the same time, I've got like captains and lieutenants they're all excited that they have an analyst and they're like, hey, can you tell me like how many burglaries we had yesterday? And I'm like, how am I supposed to do that? That seems impossible. So there was definitely some panicky moments where the expectations for what I could deliver were a complete mismatch for what it was I was able to provide based on what I had access to, what I had yet to learn, all of those things, typical challenges. And that I think that was an important moment because it taught me that you can't wait around for somebody to give you the answer. You have to be super creative with how you find it. In my case, I ended up leaning on a program that we had that accessed our CAD system that allowed me to, even if I couldn't read the crime report, at least I can see the CAD and I can see the calls for service. I can see the dispatch comments and I can understand like what actually is going on out there. And then I would use that to populate a spreadsheet or
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Do you remember the name of the program?
Well, initially it was an access database
Hmm.
that I was using. That we had a kind of a brainy lieutenant that had built it, and you look back in these moments and you're like, hey, thank God that person thought, hey, maybe Steve could use this and help me to get me going on something that would kind of fill a hole.
Yeah.
And then it's actually kind of a cool story from that. We ended up finding a vendor called First Watch that we still work with today that built a program for crime analysis based on how we were doing business, getting information out of CAD, and they customized this dashboard that every day I'd come in and I'd use it to try to get an idea of when and where crime was happening. And it actually had a mapping feature that displayed things on a map for me. We still use that 20 years later. And it hasn't even
Nice.
changed that much. And my analysts It's part of their daily routine. They come in and they look at that, and that it was a problem-solving moment, but it laid the groundwork for how we built our program.
Nice, nice. How long before you're getting another analyst?
Oh, wow. Well, that was a good, I have to think, that had to be at least 3 or 4 years
Mm-hmm.
where I was totally by myself.
Yeah.
And that came about. It's like, I think if you, in these conversations, sometimes you can see a common theme is desperation drives innovation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't have any money, so I had to take the job. I didn't have access to data, so we had to come up with another solution. And there came a point where I was so overwhelmed with work. I was getting burned out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was stressed. I couldn't. I had so many people knocking on my door asking for things. When you're a single analyst in a medium-sized department, and all of a sudden you start to have success
Mm-hmm.
in the area of crime analysis, then everybody wants a piece. And it's like, okay, we need you to do this for our special investigations division. We need you to do this for the chief's city council meeting. We need you to do this because we've got a regional burglary series. And it got to a point, there's no way one person can handle it. So we had to hire another analyst. And truth be told, that's how we ended up with a third analyst. It was the same situation. It is too much for two people. We need another one. We need another one, which is a good problem to have.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the growing pains in that are it often, for the reality for analysts, no matter how big or small your agency is, it's often you have to get to that desperate situation before people start to support you in growing and adding people and providing more resources.
Yeah. You mentioned a medium-sized department. It's back 2009 era. Do you remember how many officers you had at Oceanside?
Yeah, we're just at that time we were probably 160 to
Mm-hmm.
165 officers, and then we're not much. We haven't grown that much more than that. We're closer to 200 now, but I would
Mm-hmm.
say we've always been around 200 officers with another 100 professional staff, so a
Yeah.
department of 300.
Yeah.
And our
Do
city
you?
is 100. So Oceanside is a good sized city. We're 185,000 people. So we're the third largest city in San Diego County.
Mhm.
We're sort of that almost like a halfway point between LA and San Diego, right on the border of Camp Pendleton. So it's plenty busy here. We've
Mhm.
always felt like we're a little bit understaffed, under-resourced, especially in comparison to some of our neighboring cities.
Mhm.
But that's always kind of, I guess the flip side is we've always had to be creative and innovative with how we deal with things because we've never had all the resources that we need.
Yeah. Now, do you feel that Oceanside has the typical crime problems, or is there crime scenarios, crime situations that are unique to the police department?
I feel like Oceanside is very unique, and it's what's made it a really fun place to be an analyst. As I mentioned, our geographic location makes us a crossroads between two big metropolitan areas. Being on Camp Pendleton, the border of Camp Pendleton makes us a military town in a lot of ways.
Mm.
We are a tourist destination. We got people coming in. Our summer population makes us substantially bigger. We've changed a lot. When I started, we had a significant gang problem. At the time, we had 12 different documented gangs just in Oceanside. This was all a surprise to me. I can tell you another story about when I started, and this will kind of illustrate the point. When I showed up, this was so after I went to the homicide scene and then had enchiladas. I went back to the lieutenant's office. This was probably the next day, and she said, have you found a place to live here in Oceanside?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "My wife and I just put a deposit down on an apartment, and it's only a few blocks from the department, and it looks really nice, and it was really cheap." She says, "Oh, what's the name of the apartment complex?" And I tell her, and she's like, "Oh, hell no, you're not living there." I go, "What do you mean?" She says that's a gang area. She says the Crips run that apartment complex.
Oh man.
I said the Crips? Like you mean like the Bloods and the Crips? She's like, "Yeah." And in my head I'm thinking, "Oh, I thought Oceanside was like surfers and stuff like that." I'm like, I didn't realize we had real gangs here. And so the best part of this story is not that, but the best part of the story is she says, "Get in my car, let's go." And my lieutenant, during work hours, we hopped in her car and we drove to Carlsbad and we looked for apartments for me for for a full afternoon. We went and stopped in and saw what they had available, and she was determined that I was going to find a safe place to live. And I think it's like I owe so much to this person because she gave me a chance. But you learn a lot through that too when you become a supervisor, that, those moments when you take a personal interest in someone's life and you actually, like, even if it's like maybe that's not like how we're supposed to spend our work hours out apartment hunting. Man, I look back on that and I'm like, how lucky was that I had somebody that was like, get in my car, let's go find you a good place to live. So
Yeah. What
that
was
was
the lieutenant's name?
that was Lieutenant Sheila Potkonjak, who actually retired not long after I had started. So it was bittersweet because I had a really great boss and then
Yeah.
she left me all alone.
Oh man. Yep, that happens at police departments. Either they
Yeah,
retire or they rotate.
yeah.
Right? But it seems like you're dealing with a new captain or major regularly. So,
Oh yeah, we're we're dealing with that now. It happens. So we have come to understand that's part of the process.
yeah, and it's just that's such a unique phenomenon, I think, with police departments. You probably see it in the military, but I don't think it's common practice anywhere else where you just have this rotation of middle management at an organization.
Hmm.
It's not a common practice, right? You have merging and you have team building and unit building and you have change in terms of the hierarchical structure of an organization. But this whole idea of like, oh, all right, we're going to just rotate all these captains or all these majors right now. I just don't see that happening anywhere else other than police department and maybe the military.
No, I think you're right. And I think it's actually, this is interesting because I feel like this is sort of an under-discussed problem. It's an under-discussed topic. And it's actually, personally, it's one of the things I have the hardest time with
Hmm.
because as much as I move forward in my career, as much as I grow, and as much as I gain responsibility and respect and all those things, when you work in a police department, and you have the rotation that you're talking about, and new people come into your world, you cannot assume that they understand your job.
Hmm.
And then it's a kind of a brutal reminder that even though you may have been in your spot for 10, 15, even 20 years, somebody's going to come in there and you have to go back and you have to start with crime analysis 101 and you have to
Hmm.
say, here's what we do, here's how we work, here's what we've tried, here's what doesn't work. And you have to kind of get them on the same page. You got to get them on board. You got to get them to
You have to train
understand.
them.
You have to train them. Actually, it's a huge lift to educate that people that way because that's the key. That's the key to having a successful program is you got to have everybody engaged and involved. You got to have buy-in, and you may just assume like, yeah, I think everybody here gets it,
Mhm.
but you're going to have people that come along that absolutely do not get it because you could call it tunnel vision, but I think it's more like just the culture of police work is that you focus on your area because if you try to focus on everything, it's too much. It's
Mhm.
we do too many things. We wear too many hats. So when I'm a school sergeant, I'm focused on schools. When I'm a narcotics detective, that's my world. We have to collaborate and overlap and learn things and understand what people do, but you only have so much space in your brain. So sometimes it's inevitable. You're going to get somebody that's like, hey, I know you guys have been over here for years, but I don't really know what you guys do. Just going to happen.
Yeah. So when do you become manager?
I only actually got the title of manager recently. So,
Mhm.
but I would say I've been a manager for years. And when they
Mhm.
changed my title, and that's one of those administrative things like, hey, you think maybe we should change the title of this position because I'm doing a lot of management stuff. And they're like, "Oh, you're not a manager already?" I'm like, "Yeah." So that finally got done. But I actually, when we went through that process, I went back to, I would say it was probably, gosh, it's got to be like 8, maybe 7 years ago. We had a very dynamic chief who's now retired, Chief Fred Armijo, who came into the position, and it was a situation where people were really glad about it. We had a chief that
Mhm.
was going to come in. He had a great rapport with everybody. He had great ideas. He wanted to implement new things. And he really looked at me and said, you are part of this team. I've considered you a manager for years. My expectation is that I'm going to give you management work. You're going to have a seat at the table. And sometimes like it takes a while to get that official stamp. But sometimes all it takes is to have the right person in charge that understands your value to be able to, as an analyst, kind of rise to that level. So that's what if you were to ask me how long I've been a manager, it's since then.
Yeah. So I guess going back to when you unofficially became a manager and started taking
Yeah.
on more of the manager roles, was that a difficult transition for you to go from analyst to manager?
I think it was, yeah, it was. Now that you say that, I haven't thought about that in a while. But I'll tell you what the difficult part was. The difficult part was letting go of doing the things I really loved, and that's like the
Yes.
investigative stuff. So, working on the homicide cases and going to the meetings that are maybe it's like related to some kind of special op or motorcycle gangs or like something cool. I refuse to give it all up. I still try to keep my hands a little bit dirty. Like I've been trying to learn lately. I'm working a genetic genealogy case, which I'm slowly kind of gaining some ground on. So I never want to give it all up. But there was a hard thing where I'm getting asked to do stuff that is not the most fun. I recognize that it's important, but it was difficult. Like, man, I miss the days when I got to be an analyst. I miss those days when I could just come in and nobody was calling me with emergencies related to personnel or time cards. I can come in and if it was an emergency, it was like, hey, like we got a suspect that we got to find. So that's the kind of emergency I liked.
Yeah.
So I missed that.
Yeah. So we were talking briefly before we hit record here, and you had mentioned you have a pretty interesting hiring record there at the department. So you mentioned that everybody that you hired has never left?
That is true. Yes. We currently have grown to have 3 full-time analysts. We also now have a digital forensics analyst as a part of a newer digital forensics program. We are probably going to look on expanding even further with the deployment of a real-time crime center. But I'm proud of the fact that, yeah, we do have a strong record for bringing people in and having them stay here. So both of our other 2 analysts have been here for over 15 years.
Nice.
So they have a ton of experience, a ton of respect, and I think the best part of that is they still work as hard as ever. So they still it's really the timing of that question is really interesting because yesterday they run their own shows. They know what they're doing. I do not have to manage them too closely. Their work product is reliable and they've been around long enough to know when they need to come to see me. But I sat down with my team yesterday because we're all getting so busy that it's easy to take your eye off the ball. And I actually had to have a meeting where I said, hey guys, I think we have to figure out how to get our eyeballs back on crime trends. We're getting so many projects handed our way. We're asked to develop a real-time crime center. We're dealing with intel responsibilities related to protests, whatever it might be. We have got a lot of things that people are asking for, but I think we have to actually get back to making sure that we're keeping track of crime series and crime patterns, and even if it's just a commercial burglary, and how can we do that? And it was a great conversation. It was constructive, and it was like a reminder, like, hey, let's not forget what our job is. But the thing about that is, I was kind of a wow moment in the sense you can be in a place for a really long time. You can have the most experienced analysts, and sometimes you just need to like sit down and touch base and kind of say to each other, hey, how do we do our jobs better? We're not perfect. We're still trying to solve a lot of the same problems that we've always been trying to solve. And I think our answers get better and better. But even now, we still haven't figured it all out.
So I gotta ask, what is your secret in hiring? Because that's, as I said, that's pretty impressive that you have such a that everybody that you've hired is still with the department. Do you have a certain philosophy, or is there something that you look for when hiring?
Well, I don't think it's like a hiring approach because in our city, a lot of the hiring tasks are delegated to human resources, and we feel like we don't have enough involvement in it. So
Mm.
that's always like, hey, who do we get to talk to today is that we're going to hire? But so I would say that it has a lot more to do with our department. If I was to talk about what we've done right in building a crime analysis program, the foundation we laid for success was to try to do as much as possible to make our program as collaborative as possible. So to make it a two-way street instead of a one-way street, to not overload our analysts with here's a request, here's your information, but okay, if there's a problem happening that our neighborhood police team can deal with, how can the analyst provide something to be used in the field? And then how can those cops come back into our office, tell us what they found, and how can they make our product even better by bringing information back? So we've always tried to do that. We've always tried to make sure that in our investigations division that our analysts have a front row seat. Currently, both of our analysts sit in detective bays, so they're a part of the eyes and ears in relation to investigations as they're unfolding. And I think it's super important to have a setup where your analyst is among the first to know and not always the last to know, because that is not going to sustain itself. Your analyst is going to get completely burned out, and that's why they're going to leave. They're going to leave if they say, you know what, I worked my butt off and I never got the respect I deserved. I work so hard, I give all these people useful intel, and then they don't even tell me when they've made an arrest. Those are the things that cause people to leave police departments and go look for jobs in the private sector. You know, nobody stays in this job for the pay. My people, they have not stayed for the pay. I can tell you that. They've stayed because they get to be a part of something. They've stayed because they have a ton of respect from their peers. They stayed because if there's a murder, my crimes of violence analyst gets a phone call. Hey, can you come in? Can you help us with this? We got a situation. If we have a critical situation in the city, we've got some kind of a political situation, our analysts are a part of the conversation so that we don't have someone else making a decision of here's what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. We're invited into the process saying, hey, what can we do? What can we do together? Well, I can help with this. I can do this. Great. And then if we're fortunate enough to find success, they don't always get the recognition. I can tell you that. They don't. That's true. But they do go home at night knowing that they were a part of the solution.
Now, do you think that's the reason you stayed? I mean, obviously you've been there 20 years. There certainly had to be other opportunities either at a different police department or, as you mentioned, the private sector.
Yeah, I would say that's a big reason that I stayed. Is almost sounds corny to say, yeah, it's the people. They're like family. Like you hear that from people who stay in one place a long time. But the fact of the matter is, it's true. I mean, I've made the best friends that I have in the world I've made in this department. There are a lot of people that have now retired that I'm very close with, and I feel like I'm like the last holdout almost. I'm still here. So yeah, what are you still doing there? So, and it's true though. Those kinds of things, they really do, I think, make the difference when it comes to those decisions. Like, yes, I could go somewhere and make a little bit more money. Yes, I could go somewhere and maybe my LinkedIn page would look a little cooler. Like, for sure. And don't think I haven't thought about it. I'll come out and say it. I've applied for jobs. I've gotten burned out and said, I don't know if I can do this anymore. But then when you pursue those other options and then you take a look at what you have and I think about the situation I have here, I think first and foremost, I could never go to another police department and have what I have here. I mean, you talk about when I was given the title of manager, yes, the title is on my name tag, but the truth of the matter is it took a long time to work my way up, to gain the respect, to gain the trust, to be a part of things that are happening in this city. And I think that's the exciting thing in my career now is I'm not just working from the analyst office. I'm a part of a team. We have a brand new chief. We've got a fairly new assistant chief. We've got a whole fleet of new lieutenants, and these are my peers. We have kind of been in the trenches together, and now there's an approach that it's an exciting time in Oceanside. I mean, if you're out there and you're like, this guy sounds like a commercial for come visit Oceanside, it's actually true. I mean, this city is so different. I used to never go to the beach here because I was like, I'm not going to be caught dead out there. Now I was at a gala event with my wife last weekend at the Seabird Hotel with a view of the pier. And this is a different place. This is actually a really nice place to be. And I take a lot of pride in being a small part of that, in seeing a change in a community and a town, and that it's a safer place to be, that it's a nicer place to spend time, that you can take your family downtown. I love going down to the harbor. I've always loved like taking a paddleboard out there, going fishing. So I've grown to love where I live, but I'm proud of the fact that I'm a part of the change that's happened. And it's made me really glad that I stayed. I mean, I kind of think about like Tony Gwinn only played with one team. He played with the Padres, but man, thank God that he did. Like you're as a baseball fan, you're like, that would have been terrible if he'd gone and played for another team because look at how valuable he was in this town and what it means to, I'm sure, his family that he was a part of something that happened. And like, I definitely don't have a swing like Tony Gwinn, but I kind of think of the same thing. Like when I look back on my career, I'm going to have no regrets. I'm going to be glad that I stuck it out. I stuck it out through some hard times, and I'm going to be proud of the fact that I was able actually. It was a benefit. It was a privilege to stay in one place. That's how I'm going to look at it.
Hi, this is Carolyn Cassidy, and I'd like to give some information to you. We've all watched shows on TV where someone comes home and there's been a break-in. Their house is disrupted and possibly items have been stolen. Someone gets on the phone and calls 911. Help, please come. I've been robbed. Okay, let's clarify this. You have not been robbed. You have been burgled. A robbery is a person-to-person crime. A burglary is a property crime. If you are not home when someone comes in and takes something from you, you have been burgled. There has not been a robbery. Hashtag, you were burgled, not robbed.
So this is Sam, and I want to let you know that it's okay to talk to strangers. Obviously not if you are 4 or if you're walking alone at night or in the woods. But in general, if you're just out in your day-to-day life or you're traveling or whatever, talk to somebody, talk to strangers. It makes you a more interesting person because it gives you more perspective on life. Everyone is walking around with an interesting story. So many people will defy your expectations when you see someone and you make certain assumptions about them, whether they're conscious or unconscious. I love the moment when you realize you were wrong. It's a great feeling, and I think it makes your life richer in general. You know, if you're too shy, then maybe just read Humans of New York. That might help you to understand other people's experiences. But I'm just here to say, don't not talk to strangers.
Well, let's move on to your analyst badge story then. And for those that may be new to the show, the analyst badge story is the career-defining case or project that you work. And it's a little bit of a transition. I realize just a nice pumped up speech that you just gave of Oceanside, but it's your analyst badge story deals with it's 2020 and your department's dealing with the George Floyd protests.
Yes, I think it's a good time for a segue into this when you're talking about how communities change and how there are pivotal moments that kind of set the course for what direction a police department is going to go and what a community and their relations with that community is going to look like. And when you asked me this question, I immediately thought of 2020. It's during COVID, and we're seeing a situation develop in response to the George Floyd incident, and protests are basically starting to sweep across the country. And we knew at the time that it was more than just a few protests, that it was really a movement that was developing, and we knew it was going to affect us. It was going to touch us. We didn't know what that was going to look like. And you started to see protests in the bigger cities. We started to see indications that people locally were going to start to organize their own events. Even though we saw some things coming, I don't think we were really expecting quite what we saw. We probably had our first protest, we had, 35, 40, 50 people gather outside City Hall, and we kept an eye on it, but we didn't have any issues. And we probably thought, oh, good, we got through that. Well, we didn't know at the time. We were just getting started. And I still remember at that time, I think I ended up working 14 days in a row because of how everything kicked off and how everything grew and got bigger. And I was working closely at the time with our investigations lieutenant, who's now our Chief Valdivinos. And it was our job to try to do our best to figure out what we were dealing with. How were we going to deploy resources to manage this? And I think most important of all, and this is kind of why I think of it as a badge moment, was there was a decision that was going to be made in terms of how we were going to approach it, how we're going to handle it, how we're going to respond to it, and what that was going to look like. There was two approaches you could take. You could show up with your riot team, and we call that our mobile field force. You can draw a firm line, you can lay down the law, and you can show people who's boss, or you can do your best to understand where people might be coming from, even if it's targeted at you as a police department, and you can do your best to minimize or diffuse, I guess is a better word, diffuse any conflicts or tense situations. I think most importantly is you can decide how that's going to be received and what that's going to look like and how that's going to reflect on your police department. And we decided that the best approach was to do whatever we could to engage with the community, do whatever we could to understand people's motivations. And most of all, in that moment, I think we understood that there was an important decision to make. And it was, how can we handle this situation to minimize and diffuse any conflicts, any problems, but more than anything, how can we keep people safe? That was the number one job. And I think that was the most important thing that we recognized in that moment was, at the end of the day, no matter how you felt about the arguments and the positions and the stance that people were taking, what was our job? Our job is to keep people safe. Mm-hmm. So in order to do that, the thing that we had to have in place was we had to have intel ahead of the protests. And the reason that this is my badge moment is because this is where all the work over the previous 15 years paid off. We had developed a program where we had a seat at the table, where people trusted our analysts, where we knew how to network with other outside agencies. We knew what our jobs would be when this moment came around. We didn't have to try to panic and figure out, well, yeah, we got to come up with a response. By the way, we're going to need to find somebody to watch social media to tell us who our organizers are or how many people we're going to have at a protest. So we already had that in place and we just jumped into our roles. I really feel like we came out of that whole year, that whole situation on top. The moment I remember most of all was one of our larger protests was kicking off, and in this particular protest, it was unplanned, but the protesters decided to march. So they left their spot and they started to parade down Coast Highway through Oceanside. And it was probably well over 500 people, probably closer to 800, 1,000 people are marching through the streets. So obviously then you suddenly have traffic concerns, you got safety concerns. This is another one of those moments where, well, how do you handle it? Well, this was not planned, but next thing I know, our motor officers are basically providing a police escort down the street. And it was incredible to look and see people that were holding signs that were full of profanity, that were blasting police departments, are receiving a police escort to keep them safe. And I felt like that was the moment where we rose above. We said, we're going to focus on our jobs. We're not going to let politics or our personal opinions get in the way of what we're doing. The community saw it. The microscope was on us. Everybody was watching, and we knew that. And it really changed the narrative to, we're not protesting Oceanside PD necessarily, but we want to talk about police reforms. And on the heels of that, we had people in place that said, okay, well, you know what? How about after the protest, we sit down at the table? Let's sit down and talk about this. And because maybe we can admit that maybe we're not perfect. Maybe there's some things that we can change in policing and we can do better, but we're willing to listen. But we recognize that there's a time that people may want to get their voice out there, but there's also a way to handle it so that we can turn it into a positive. We can build bonds with the community. We can turn a negative into a positive. And I really feel like we did that in that moment. And I got to be a part of that. And that's my badge moment.
Yeah. I think it's interesting the analyst role in this story. If you're in a situation where there's a protest, the role of the analyst in that situation may be, okay, we're going to be identifying people in the crowd and we need to know if they're dangerous. And so the analyst is putting on the hat, identifying people and running background checks and starting to identify people in the crowd. And I think that's usually the role that maybe most people would imagine an analyst would do in that situation.
I think you're close to describing what that role is. I think one thing, and this is the reason that I believe you have to have a solid foundation going into a situation like this, is you're you're doing your best to assess a threat. You're
Hmm.
doing your best to identify activists and organizers for the purpose of keeping them safe. But you have to remember, you're not investigating criminals. It's a very fine line between how you run people and what you
Hmm.
look for and what you dig up. And it's perfectly fair to approach this and say, we're going to do our best to make sure there's nobody that's going to be violent. But if I recognize somebody that's not a threat, I have to have the ability and the experience to hand that name over to one of our officers and say, you know what, here's somebody that we've identified, not because we think they're dangerous, but see if you can talk to this person and give them a call before the protest happens so that if they need our services, if they feel like something is getting out of hand during the protest, they can call us. We still handle that the same way. We try to get in touch with organizers and we say, hey, can we trade cell phone numbers so that when this event starts, you can call us and we can call you? And we just need to lay down the rules and do your best to keep your people in line, but we recognize you don't have control over everything. And that usually is like a pretty good way to connect with people because most of our protest organizers, they advertise it as a peaceful protest. That's
Hmm.
typical to what happens. So, but my point is the analyst role. It's not simple. It's not for somebody who isn't trained on how to do things. It's not for somebody who doesn't have the kind of skills and judgment to be a part of a high stakes situation. That's why I feel the role of the analyst in the scenario is incredibly important because you can't just like pull somebody from another assignment and tell them to do this. You have to have the people that understand what the job is to tackle something that's as complex as like a threat assessment related to a protest. It's a lot more than just scanning Facebook, in my opinion.
Yeah. That's well, it's funny because I often say on this show that I think an analyst could spend their entire day on social media if they're not careful. Like that's what
Yeah,
they
so
could they
sometimes it feels like that. It
yeah.
definitely feels like that. It's definitely that's something that's changed from when I started is if you're an analyst now, you're expected to have some pretty slick social media skills.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good segue into our next segment, and it's talking about technology, AI programs versus the human analyst. And
Oh,
so
yes.
you wanted to touch on this. You have a speaking engagement coming up, Left a Boom, right?
That's correct. Yes. I'm new to this event, so we'll see how it goes, but my understanding is I'm going to be speaking on the topic of AI and technology innovations and the need for human analysts in conjunction with the developments that we're seeing. So that's where my mind has been lately. I would say that I really believe this is the issue of the day. I think what we're seeing happening is fundamentally changing law enforcement. It's fundamentally changing the way police work is done. I think this is more than just a trend. It's more than just like the latest, buzzword.
Mm-hmm.
AI is creeping into everything we do, but I think the way that it's affecting police work is profound. It was a few weeks ago, I was invited out to go to the headquarters of a very prolific technology maker. I won't say the name of the company, but it rhymes with Saxon. And I show up for this not knowing quite to what to expect, but walking into the headquarters of this building was, I've been telling people, it was like walking onto the Starship Enterprise. I swear to God, you walk in, there's an airlock and a psh, and you step inside, and then you go in, and it's like, what do they call it? What do they call that in Starship Enterprise? Where Captain Kirk is standing.
The main geez,
What is that called? We need a Star Trek person.
yeah,
The bridge, the
the
bridge.
bridge. Yeah,
So
there you go.
yes, the whole office setup is like the bridge, right? And circular balconies twirl all surrounding the center area of this office. And then they take you downstairs and there's a basement. I think we went downstairs. That the only way I can describe this is like Q's laboratory in a James Bond film where there's like
Nice.
scientists that are testing all these gadgets and they're firing this and that. You really feel like you're on a movie set. And then you go back into a room and you realize that like not only are a lot of these products like for sale, we're using a lot of them already and they're not going away. Whether it be AI technology, things that are related to drones, real-time crime centers, you name it. It is this is like a new world that we're living in, and it kind of blew my mind. And the first thing I thought of was, because I'm looking around at chiefs from various departments across the country, and they're writing down their shopping list. They're thinking about what they're going to buy and what they're not going to buy. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, this is some really cool stuff for sure. There's some interesting things in here, but there's some things I don't know. I don't know if this is a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
If how is our community going to respond to this one? Maybe my perspective is a little bit different in Southern California, but I was kind of asking those questions to myself. But I think the one thing that I do see is, and I think people will recognize this, when you have a lot of this flashy stuff in front of you, you start to forget about the human component that's needed to make sure that this stuff is being used in the right way, whether it's being used responsibly, effectively, or simply in the most simplest terms, who's gonna manage it? Somebody's got to be at the controls. So you start to think about the skills that an analyst has, and the truth is, a lot of these things they're going to fall in the laps of an analyst, especially if they're deployed in a real-time crime center. So who do you put in there? I feel like one of the challenges now is everybody wants a real-time crime center. We're going to make sure we get a big video wall. We're going to get super powerful computers. We're going to have cameras everywhere. And then the last question is, who do we staff it with? Well, in my opinion, that should be the first question. And I don't think it's necessarily, you don't answer that by saying it's the crime analyst. I think you answer it by saying you got to make sure you have the right person in there. You got to make sure that you have a person with analyst skills. I think the challenge for the analyst is, now you're taking a crime analyst or an intel analyst and you're saying, okay, your job is not just to be an analyst. Now you need to be a detective. You need to be a dispatcher. You need to be a patrol officer. Maybe even a drone pilot. Who knows? But you need to be all those things in one. And I think there's some huge questions too about an analyst that you've worked for 15 years behind a desk, and you're good at your job, but you've seen a lot. You've been through a lot. You've been exposed to a lot. Nobody really realizes how much you've actually kind of had to deal with emotionally. And now you're in a real-time crime center, and you just witnessed something horrible happen on a camera, something that's going to stay with you for the rest of your life. And you were a part of that, and you were listening to the call as it was coming in. Nobody thought of that. Oh man, like what are we, we didn't realize that all this technology was going to change how people are exposed to crime. These are important questions that I think can be forgotten when you are in the rush to get the latest and the greatest.
The way I feel about this topic is, and this is a topic as you and I have been around 20 plus years since we started our first days as a law enforcement analyst. There's always been this idea that the computer is going to replace the analyst, and you've been hearing that a lot. With AI, I think that's certainly that drum has gotten louder. It's interesting that why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't they work together, right? Why can't the analysts use AI to leverage what they do? Bring them both together instead of having one or the other.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point for a couple reasons. One of them being is, it may be a new scenario, but it feels like an old conversation. It feels like we've been having this same conversation for a long time. I mean, do you remember what was it? What was the pred poll? Remember pred poll? Can I say that?
Yeah, that's been a while since I heard that. Yes.
Yeah, hey, we just rolled out with pred poll. It's going to predict where all the crime happens. We don't need an analyst anymore. I've got a little square box on my map that's going to tell me where my next robbery happens.
Yeah.
And all of us sitting in the analyst chair were like, good luck with that. So, and what happened with that? I think there was a wake up call at some point where it realized, like, yeah, the map, it's not the map. You got to have somebody, you can't just look at the map. You got to have somebody look in the map. You have to have somebody that's going to be able to say, here's what showed up in the map. Here's what you need to pay attention to. Here's what you can forget about. And here's what this is telling us. And I was shocked when I saw that kind of thing play into a conversation of, we don't need the analysts anymore. I was like, you guys are going to have to hire more analysts. And I think the same situation is true now. You're going to have to hire more analysts. I think we just recently visited Irvine Police Department. They have a real-time crime center that they've deployed, and it's doing pretty well. and they've put a lot of investment into it. But the best part of what they've done is they've invested heavily into their staffing being analysts. They've got 8 analysts that they can assign to that room. For a city the size of Irvine, I think that's fantastic. I think it's forward thinking. I think it's realistic about the approach of training people for that job rather than saying we just need another set of eyeballs that can look at cameras. Like, you got to have the right people in that chair.
Very good. Let's talk briefly about the IACA, because as I told you, that's where we met. And I just want to get your overall take on the IACA. So you just open it up. And when I say IACA, what comes to mind?
When you say IACA, the International Association of Crime Analysts, what comes to mind? I would have to say the very first IACA conference that I ever attended was a very important part of my journey. That takes us back to the very first days of my job here in Oceanside. And when I was in that, actually it was in those first few weeks and months that I started to struggle and realize like I had a lot of things to figure out. Like, I could fake it enough to get the job, but I've got some real problems here that I don't have answers to. And luckily they sent me to Seattle for the IACA conference, and I showed up at the hotel and I sat down and I recognized right away Samantha Gwinn, who at the time worked at the San Diego Police Department. And I go, somebody I know, thank God. And I walked over and she was sitting with Carolyn, Cassidy, who both of them are still dear friends to this day. But at the time, they were the only people that I knew in the profession. And I was like, well, you know what? You guys seem pretty cool. I think I'm going to follow you guys around for a few days. And there was kind of 2 benefits. One was I realized I wasn't alone. I realized I wasn't the only one out there that was trying to figure things out, that had problems in terms of how to get information, to build programs, deal with difficult bosses, whatever it might be, deal with cops that didn't understand my job. I was definitely not, everybody at the conference was like that. So I was like, this is great. That was like a breath of fresh air, kind of a moment where I realized that the profession is bigger than this job here in Oceanside. There's more going on, and I was really happy to be a part of that. I think the other thing that happened was I had a ton of fun hanging out with people. So I remember we were in Seattle, and I lived in the Northwest, so I'm in part a Mariners fan, and we went out to a Mariners game. And
I remember that.
Were you at this, Jason?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
gosh,
And I remember
you're gonna remember this. This is a great story. So we go out for the Mariners game, and I'm getting to know people and everything, and I probably was like so naive. I'm like, well, I guess we'll go to the Mariners game and then go back to my hotel. And the Mariners game was over, and it was like, oh, we're just getting started, and we go out on the town, and the group of us end up in the Coyote Bar, which, I think Coyote, anything called the Coyote Bar, you can kind of guess what that looks like people dancing on the bar. It's like a wild spot, whatever. Yeah. And I look over, and I won't name this person, but I look over, one of the analysts from the group is riding the mechanical bull, within seconds of walking in the place. And I'm like, whoa, these people are a lot more exciting than people say. Like, we get labeled as the nerdy group, but man, this is the place to be. This is fun. So I fondly remember the friends I made through the IACA. That was like medication to my illness. I was struggling in so many ways, and the IACA came and rescued me. And I learned a lot, not just at the conference, but through the connections that I made. People that even if they're across the country, I could pick up the phone and say, hey, I've got a problem. I know you guys are similar to us in this way. Can you help me? And I leaned on that heavily for years. So, and it was one of those things too, was I had to preach about that when I got back, because people would be like, I try to go to the conference as often as I could, and people would be like, oh yeah, you're gonna go off to this town and have a good time for a week, paid vacation by the department, huh? And I was like, no, I really need this. I have to go, because there's nowhere else to go to get training. There's nobody that's talking about these things in a room. There's nobody that's teaching me how to do this. I have to go to the IACA, because these are the people that are living it, and these are the people that are sharing their knowledge. So I have nothing but the best memories about that involvement in those days.
Yeah. So you won 2 awards. It's interesting. It seems now that it might actually be civilian award season in the springtime. I was on LinkedIn and I see all these analysts winning awards for various reasons throughout the country. In 2005, you won the overall best product and crime analysis product, and then 2007, you won the best tactical crime bulletin. What did that do for you? How do you value that? These awards that analysts are given?
I think the most important for me, the most important thing about those awards was not necessarily the recognition. It was the fact that it validated what I was doing in the department. So when I was doing my best to come out with a bulletin related to a robbery series, I was hoping that it was good. I was hoping that it would help. I was hoping that I was doing my job. But I didn't totally know, and getting the recognition through something like IACA and being able to go and speak at a conference and talk about something that we were working on here in the department was incredibly validating, and it allowed me to continue to move forward. It allowed me to continue to kind of push things in that direction, because I could fall back on it. If I had somebody that was maybe doubting like whether this is a good thing to do or whether it had any value to it, I was able to trust that it was the right thing. Say, look, like, I've talked to analysts across the country. This is how we want to do this. So and so in this city, this is something that they do and it works. This is when we did this before, it led to an arrest. All those things. The IACA, those awards, that's, I think, was the most value in getting those.
All right. Let's go on to our advice section for our listeners, and this can be for new analysts, experienced analysts. Can be something that analysts can study now because 5 years it's going to be important. What do you got?
I would say that my advice is a second part of that question, and why have I stayed here for so long?
Mm-hmm.
So my advice to analysts would be, do whatever you can to continually reinvent yourself. Mm-hmm. If you were to ask me, why have I stayed here so long? I would say, the truth be told, I don't think I've had the same job for more than 2 or 3 years. My job has changed so much from when I started. The things that I work on have always changed, and the best part of my job is that they've allowed me to work on the things that I want to work on, the things that I enjoy, the things that I want to pursue. So an example of that would be coming from London, doing the degree I did, looking at an intel career. I really wanted to do something in counterterrorism. I wanted to do something related to Homeland Security. That was an ambition of mine. And it took a while because I was getting shut down. I was like, no, I was told we got people that can handle that. And I'm like, are you sure? I really think like we should have an intel component to this. And they're like, nope, you can't go to that training because we got somebody else going. And I'm like, finally, I was able to break through because I had the right people that were listening. And the next thing I knew, I was going to New Mexico to do like explosives training and learn about how to recognize explosives. And we were blowing stuff up. We blew up a car bomb. I mean, it was awesome. It was like that's one of the highlights of my career, was going to New Mexico and doing a terrorism training course. And that was because I thought carefully about how to make an argument why that was something I should be working on. And it was something I wanted to do. And I managed to not only go to the training, but I brought it back. And then I started teaching it to our officers. And then myself, along with some colleagues, we built a terrorism liaison program. I'm proud of the fact that that's not just about like responding to a suspicious incident. It's about having like an intel component within your local law enforcement terrorism awareness program. So we built a very good program. For years, I would head down to, and I still do from time to time, down to the Fusion Center in San Diego or the FBI offices that are here in North County. And we would meet and we talk about stuff. And I slept better at night because I'm like, at least I don't think anybody was doing this until we started it. Nobody was really paying attention and they needed to be. And so we implemented that. And that program still is a part of how we do things today. And for me, that's another career highlight, but it's only because I decided I'm not going to limit myself to what's on my job description. I'm going to look for ways that I can grow and challenge myself. And even if some people might not see that as my job, I think if I can do it and there's a good reason for it, I'm gonna chase it down. And I've done that over the course of my career. And I think that's something I don't always see. And I see people get, oh, I'm so tired of doing the same thing. Well, whose fault is that? You have to ask that question. You're doing the same thing. You're complaining about it. What do you like to do? What do you want to do? And it's not just assignments. It's also like how you engage with your community, maybe. Our analysts, like they're pretty active we have a program here in Oceanside called the Oceanside Youth Partnership. So every week they take off when this program is running, they take off a little early from their shift and they go out and they hang out with kids that were maybe they're at-risk youth that we've incorporated into a policing program where we teach them things, but we interact with them. And it's not just for cops. Our analysts are out there doing that and they get a lot out of that. So, you know, I feel like those are the things. If you can find those things, you're gonna that's my advice. That's how you're gonna not just maybe survive and last somewhere, but that's how you're gonna really like have a fulfilling career. That's my advice.
Yeah, you gotta be tenacious. You gotta be a go-getter. I was laughing there because Joe Ryan talks to a lot of analysts. He meets these analysts that are just completely miserable. Like they're not doing what they want, but they're not leaving either. And we were trying to come up with a term for that type of analyst, and I think the leading term is a gluttonist. An analyst that's a glutton for punishment.
That's a good one. Yeah, they're definitely in some kind of purgatory. I've seen it plenty.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things that they're beaten down, and they just feel they're not being listened to, and they just feel lost. But at the same time, they're showing up for work, right? And they're not pursuing any other opportunities, and they're not trying to change their situation. And you feel for them.
Well, and the truth is, I mean, you can say, why don't you leave and do something else? Well, a lot of us have lives. We got kids that go to schools and we can't leave our job, or maybe there's other circumstances that like, I can't take a risk. I don't want to lose my health insurance or my benefits. My retirement is good. I mean, it would be great to leave, but I can't. But if there's things in your life that you can't control, maybe there's some things that you can control that'll make your situation a little better. So I think that's one of them.
All right. Let's finish up with personal interest then. What do you like to do when you're not at Oceanside Police Department?
My hobbies have aligned themselves with being at the Oceanside Police Department for 20 years because I'd say probably getting on the water is my number one goal when I'm not at work. So whether it's surfing or paddleboarding, I recently learned to sail, that was another moment where I stepped out of my comfort zone and did something I was totally intimidated by. And I still get scared half to death when I take the boat out on the big bay in San Diego. But those are probably my favorite things to do. They also, my wife is the same way. She has those same interests. So we've sort of developed that over time. And it's kind of come along with the fact that I don't think we thought our life was going to be in San Diego. We talked a lot about moving back to the Northwest. And then over time, you start to realize, hey, our life is actually here. And you start to embrace the things that are available to you. And so I didn't start to learn to surf until my kids started doing it. So I was like over 40 when I started to learn to surf, but I love it. I mean, I was down at the beach last weekend for my daughter's, was having a birthday party down there, and I was the only guy out there without a wetsuit. I said, this is a pretty nice hot day. I think I can handle this. So that was kind of a cool moment. But those are my favorite things to do.
So what on surfing, what is the most badass thing you've ever done?
I have done very little that you could describe as badass. I mean, just simply getting up on the board and not totally wiping out is a victory for me.
Yeah.
I would have to say. So yeah, I cannot tell you a story about the time I got barreled at Black's Beach. That's not going to be in this conversation, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah.
So.
All right, very good, Steve. Our last segment of the show is Words to the World, and this is where you can promote any idea that you wish. What are your words to the world?
Well, my words to the world are very similar to my advice. That's just not only to reinvent yourself, but always act like you belong. I think if you're an analyst, especially in a police department, and you tell somebody that you work for the Oceanside Police Department, often you get the question, oh, are you a cop? Well, my words to the world are never answer that question with, no, I'm just an analyst. That breaks my heart because you're not only minimizing your role, you're actually doing a disservice to the profession. Take it as an opportunity to say, no, you know what? My job's a little different. Let me tell you about what I do. However you want to say it, however you want to explain it. And you're going to have to explain your job. If you're out there and you're thinking about this career, you're going to have to tell people it's not CSI. I'm sorry. Even in this day and age, you're going to have to explain what you do. But you may be in a support role, but don't play second fiddle. Like, you may be in a support role, but don't think of yourself as, I'm only here if people ask me for something. Take a leadership role. Be a leader in your agency and your organization. Don't think that you're limited because you're not sworn. You never know what you can do, and you never know what people will let you do if you try. And always walk in the room like you belong there.
Very good. Well, I leave every guest with you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later.
Yep.
But I do appreciate you being on the show, Steve. It was great catching up. Thank you so much, and you be safe.
Thanks very much, Jason. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. You can show your support by sharing this and other episodes found on our website at www.leapodcasts.com. If you have a topic you would like us to cover or have a suggestion for our next guest, please send us an email at leapodcasts@gmail.com. Till next time, analysts, keep talking.